Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
Welcome to Crime Redefined. We hope you've enjoyed our past episodes, and we are certain that you will enjoy today's. Our guest is a colleague of mine on the Los Angeles Superior Court Expert Witness Panel, and his name is Martin Flores.
Martin is a highly sought-after gang expert who assists attorneys in cases with the highest stakes. His background makes him uniquely qualified to testify in courts of law about all things relating to gang culture.
Martin Flores earned a BA in Chicano Studies with a minor in education and anthropology from the University of California at Berkeley. Martin's also taken classes at UCLA in the areas of community planning and education.
That is impressive indeed, but unfortunately, Martin also attended the School of Hard Knocks, losing his brother to a drive-by shooting in 1994. As you will hear in the interview, Martin has done and seen all the right things to make him an expert in gangs. His area of expertise include gang structures, gang politics, interpreting tattoos, and identifying hand signs, symbols, and codes, among other things.
Martin's backstory, if you will, is really compelling and fascinating. So get ready for a crash course on gangs and their impact on the criminal justice system with my friend, Martin Flores. Welcome, Martin. Thank you so much for joining us on Crime Redefined today.
Thank you for the opportunity and pleasure to join you both.
You know, it's a real pleasure, Martin. Mehul's mentioned you many times over the years, and we're really excited to pick your brain and your background on the subject matter.
Absolutely.
Well, Martin, I want to go way back, and I know that you had a life-altering tragedy when you were in college, but before we get into that, Martin, can you give us a little bit of a sense of what your childhood was like growing up in Boyle Heights in East Los Angeles, and sort of what kind of things you saw and what you were exposed to even at a young age?
Absolutely. So I always say I'm a proud product of my community. I grew up in Boyle Heights. I'm the 30 youngest of 9 children, and my parents immigrated from Mexico, right? So my dad was a sole financial provider. My mom was the housewife that raised all 9 of us in the heart of the hood, in the barrio.
God bless her.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. And she's still around. My dad passed 3 years ago. My mom's still around. Thank God. But, you know, I grew up in front of a park known as Fresno Park or Garcia Park. And in that environment growing up, you got a chance to see all the positive and negatives that come with it. Positives is sports, families getting together, activities, playground, all that good stuff. Negative is you'd have violence, overdose, rivalries, right? So I grew up in an area that's considered the East LA interchange. So those freeways going into downtown LA, right? The 10, the 101, the 5, the 60, right? So literally on our street, to go up the block on one end is a tunnel to go through to get to the elementary school. On the other side of the street was another tunnel to get through to go to the local market or the local church, right? Or to go to my junior high, to go through an alley hugging the freeway, right? To go under freeway bridges. And I say that to say that being exposed to gangs was a part of my reality, right? So growing up, I didn't see gangs as all negative because I had friends who were gang members or neighbors who were gang members. And so I saw them as human beings, right? But naturally, some of the elements of gangs involve violence, involve drug use, involve taking advantage of others, confronting others, what people call hitting up people, right? Or tagging in the neighborhood. So growing up where I grew up, I say was a beautiful experience because there is this family connection with your neighbors, and you knew your neighbors, your friends' moms, they knew you. The parents would pray together on a daily basis, rotate homes. So there is that strong community bond, but there was also that risk of, is somebody going to confuse me for being a gang member based on where I live? Is somebody going to confuse me because of my friends that I may belong to a group, right? Am I going to be safe walking through this tunnel today or through that freeway underpass, right? Am I going to choose to get caught up in this mess, right? So growing up, I saw that, and I think it also defined who I am and who I wanted to be. I say that to say that I realized at a young age that a lot of my peers who did get in the gang had limited access besides their geographic boundaries. They couldn't go freely to their friend's house no more because in another gang area, or they couldn't go freely to a certain park or a certain school or certain playgrounds, right? So I decided at that young age to say, I'm not going to join a gang. I want to be free to walk my entire community of Boyle Heights, whether, walking through, 5, 6 different considered gang boundaries, but I'm not limited, right? So that was a part of my mentality, my mindset of survival, and at the same time, pride of my community. As you mentioned, Mehul, I did face tragedy. Back when I was in college in 1994, my little brother was killed in a drive-by shooting. 17 years old, he got shot about half a mile from our house. They were just dropping off friends, but some friends that were there, they were targeted, and my little brother ended up getting that bullet, right? That was a wake-up call. That was something that was no longer just, we grew up in the neighborhood, we have these pathways, these passes to get through and forth, back and forth. Now we lost a loved one. How is that possible? Right. So that was a reality that I saw, but I tried not to look at it as just the tragicness of my little brother being killed, but also the tragicness of why does somebody pull the trigger? What is going on in my neighborhood, in my community, in my schools, in our playgrounds that will allow a youngster to pull a trigger and take the life of somebody else?
And your brother's name was it Rogelio?
Rogelio Flores, yes.
And
right?
just out of curiosity, in your childhood, what were the gangs that were closest to you that, you guys would worry the most about?
Well, I grew up in the area I grew up in was considered White Fence, one of the oldest gangs in LA. My neighbor was from White Fence, WF. And so that was the area I live in. That was the gang that pertained in that area, right? So growing up, I really didn't have a problem with White Fence. I would walk up and down those tunnels and freeway passes, not a problem, because they knew my neighbor, or I was teammates or classmates. And so there was no issues with me in that environment. But growing up, I also saw the conflict with another gang called VNE, stands for Barrio Nuevo Estrada, which are primarily in the projects on the other side of the freeway. And that's where they would have conflict at the park. They would have fights, stabbings, fires, things that would trigger the conflict, tagging that would be crossed out. But in my immediate area, within I would say a 4 or 5 block radius, you'd have VNE, you have Opal Street, you have 8th Street, you have White Fence. That's just in a 5 block radius.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. So going to high school, I mean, you walk, then Evergreen, not too far from there, then Breach Street, Tiny Boys. So in my immediate area, it was, you come across different people from different neighborhoods, depending on where you're at, or going to see some friends on the other side of the high school, other neighborhoods that you come across, right? So those are realities, man. Those are things that I faced. But the fact that I was more of that get along with everybody guy, right? So I had, did good in sports. So people respected me as an athlete at the local level, nothing big, but just at the local level. So people respected me as an athlete. Then I did good in school. So people respected me as a student. And I got along with friends who lived in different areas. So for me, these gang boundaries weren't really an issue for me because I didn't find that trouble, look for that trouble. And I had somebody that I knew that knew somebody of that neighborhood that I could drop a name, right? So I never really had an issue growing up in these gang areas because I wasn't caught up in one. Although I lived in a certain area, I had friends from different neighborhoods that I kind of had a safe passage. I had a pass to get through. And I think of it just being blessed because I literally was that kid that walked to school, that came back home, that stopped by the little market, got some snacks and continued on. There's only one time when I came back from school and I'm going down the tunnel to my house and 4 dudes are walking up from Y Fence, right? The reason I know because I found out later and I knew because ain't nobody walking up the tunnel going that direction that is not from Y Fence, right? Because everything has, if you're from a certain area, you're going a certain way, right? So these 4 dudes were getting high at the park. Normally, at the bottom of the tunnel, the boys would hang out down there. The guys, we would call them the Fresno boys. They'd hang out down there. They'd be drinking, smoking. But those are the fellas. So in essence, those were like the guards, if you will, the tunnel. They weren't, but that was a safe passage, right? But that day, they weren't there. And these 4 dudes are walking up. I'm walking back home by myself with my backpack. I got $5 inside my shoe.
How old are you at this point, Martin?
I'm a junior in high school, so I'm 16, 17 years old. And that day, 2 guns, bro. 2 guns are pulled on me.
Oof.
And one of them pulls the trigger. And Mehul, that day, that moment, it was like a black hole. And I just felt me just falling down this black hole, right? The image of just, I don't know, death, emptiness. And then they tell me, run. They made me take out my shoes. And obviously they knew that people would stash money in their shoes. That was a way to kind of hide your shit in case you get hit up.
Right.
And so they took the $5 I had in my shoe and I ran down the tunnel and the boys weren't down there. The guys that are normally there drinking, smoking. And again, for people who are on the outside, you would look at them as a nuisance. But when you grow up in these areas, these are your friends. These are your, not peers because they were older.
Yeah.
But these are people that you bank on, right? They would play basketball at the gym and hang out right by the edge of the tunnel. That day,
wait a minute.
There.
Martin, go back real quick. You said the trigger was pulled.
Yeah. So trip out. This is what I learned. So trip out on this.
Yeah.
So I find out. So that day I get home. I'm mad. I'm crying. I'm frustrated. So my sister calls the cops. I tell my neighbor. They get bats and we go look for these dudes, right? And we go by, and then there's another little neighborhood at the time called Street Boys. And we know all these people from growing up. We went to school together. So we go to that right then. We hit these dudes up. We say, hey, man, you seen 4 dudes? They just they hit up Martin. They pulled the gun, all this stuff, right? He goes, oh, that was you? He said, there was bullets in that fucking gun. But that one that he pulled didn't have a bullet.
Oh, geez. And I assume he pointed it directly at you.
Shit? And he had it in my head.
Oh, my God.
These dudes were high. I could smell it. It turns out I recognize one dude from growing up, but not enough to say this motherfucker. But if I would have seen him, I would have caught him. But the other 3 dudes were from the Hollywood clique, right? If these dudes were from the immediate area where I grew up, chances are they would have questioned me. I would have dropped the name and it would have been good. But the fact that 3 of the 4 dudes were not from Boyle Heights, they were from another clique, they just did their shit. They didn't give a fuck.
You know, Martin, right? I think if we x-rayed you, we'd find a horseshoe inside of you. Man.
Yeah, brother. So that was my truly other tragic situation. Thank God, nothing but a scary moment that I had to face in my own neighborhood involving the local gang. And really, that would have been prevented had the boys in the bottom been there and had the guys going up would have been from Boyle Heights.
Here's the understatement. And I can't even imagine what that must be like, that every time you walk out your house to just, have this balancing act, this high wire act, and how stressful that must be.
But growing up though, it almost became like natural, right? I think looking back as an adult,
I knew you were going to say that, and that's terrible
right
in itself,
Yeah, no, of course,
it's nerve. It's just, it's kind of a normal everyday
normalized,
thing.
right?
Yeah,
it's a part of your. I mean, you're conscious. You're going through this part of town. There might be less people. You're going through this walkway. You might find a homeless person. You might find a crazy person. You might find somebody who may cause you harm. So those risk factors were always there, even in the tunnel.
Right.
The risk factors wasn't limited to gangs. I mean, you had homeless people that would bring out their sexual parts and intimidate girls, and girls got raped in the tunnel. I mean, those things happened, right? You know what I'm saying? So you always had these awarenesses of your environment. And it wasn't limited to gangs. Gangs was a part of the reality, especially being young and growing up in that era of what would be considered the early 90s, late 80s, when violence was escalated, right? So that was a part of that environment. If I could backtrack a little bit, when we grew up, we were the little Fresno boys, us and our friends on that block. What was interesting about our group, because we lived on Fresno Street, and if you look at the address, it's Fresno Street, right? That's my neighbor. That's where I grew up. But our era of kids, we were the Fresno boys, and it was during that time in the late 70s, early 80s, that a lot of streets in our city were boys. It was Diamond Street boys. It was Dakota boys, Inez boys. Some of these streets became neighborhoods, tiny boys, right? So growing up, we were into sports, so we played against different streets. And some of them, like I said, became gangs. Some became a group of just drunks and drug users. And us, because we were into sports, we kind of pursued that moving forward. So we, as a group, didn't become a gang. We, as a group, did not get caught up in the drugs and the alcohol. We kind of got more hyped into the sports route, playing at the park. That was our home base. Then we took it on to high school, and we all played high school sports, right? And my group of little Fresno boys are now, firemen, educators, construction workers, professionals, right?
That's awesome.
And that is awesome. And that's unique. But like I said earlier, is that our block was unique in that literally every mother knew every kid. Any mother could check any kid. And every day, these mothers, they're all Catholic. Every day, these mothers would have a rosary at one of their homes, and they rotated. So there was a unique, I could speak from me in my experience on my block, right? What I experienced may not be the same for the person who lived 2 blocks down or 5 blocks down.
Yeah,
right?
It's like your block was kind of like an island among all the chaos, it sounds like.
Right. For the sake of accountability. Now, we saw a lot because we live in front of a park. We experienced a lot because we live in front of a park where we had to go through tunnels and all that stuff, right? And we experienced it firsthand because, we didn't have the means. We literally walked to the local pool, which was Salazar Park, which is about a mile away from our house, to go to a pool. That was the closest pool, or Roosevelt High School pool, same distance, right? So even though we saw and were exposed to a lot, we still had this unique bond, right? Like my neighbor, I said, is from White Fence. He's older. He's probably like 10 years older than I. He was very respected. He eventually phased out and became he had a drywall company. He's a very successful drywall company, right? He eventually grew out of that life, settled with a good woman and raised kids, and, became very successful once he chose to be in the field that his dad was in, which was construction, right? But the fact that he was, when we were younger, he had a lot of pools, so there was no issues. My best friends were his brothers, so it was we had that safe passage, So yeah, it's interesting. It's but that taught me many things, which are important in the field the work that I do now, is that I can't judge gang members with the stroke that they're all the same and they're all violent and they all the negative things. I've learned that through my personal life and working my professional experience is that the population I work with, they're unique. Their stories are unique. Their experiences are unique. And the reason why they may be gang members is also a unique reason, right? And it's important to understand that story. It's important to understand that journey, right? Just because I didn't have to join a gang and I grew up in Nevada, doesn't mean that the person down the block didn't have to join the gang. That person very likely had to join a gang because their circumstances may have been different from mine, even though I grew up in the same geographic area, right? So I've learned that I got to respect that pathway that people have gone through, right? And unfortunately, in this environment, most of them are painted in a certain light as if they all want to be the most notorious individuals, want to cause the most harm, and want to move up the ranks. And in most cases, that's not true. That's a small percentage of individuals who may fit that profile. But the narrative of that small percentage is sold as if it's a narrative for them all.
Hey, Martin, I've got a couple quick follow-ups for you. We have a lot of listeners around the world. And could you give us a quick geography lesson exactly where Boyle Heights is? A lot of people know Los Angeles, but I want to give people an idea of where it's located, like how far you are from the actual city center of Los Angeles, or maybe the coast, like Venice Beach. Kind of lock us in so an area people can know that it's how condensed this area is and how close that Boyle Heights is to everywhere.
So Boyle Heights, it's a part of the city of Los Angeles. So literally, it's the town before the LA River. So when the LA River divides downtown LA or the Arts District from Boyle Heights. So Boyle Heights is basically when you consider the 10 freeway going into downtown LA near General Hospital.
And then the 10 freeway, just for our listeners, is a east-west. So that's what takes you from Santa Monica all the way out to Riverside, and then really,
all the way to the East Coast.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Right. So it's basically Boyle Heights is a community that basically borders downtown LA. The LA River divides Boyle Heights from the downtown LA. So that's where you have those different bridges going into downtown LA from the east side. And we say Boyle Heights because it's a part of the city of LA. People many times refer to it as East LA, but technically it's not East LA. For those of us that grew up in Boyle Heights, there's a dividing street, that's Indiana Street. So those that live on east of Indiana, that's unincorporated LA, they're East LA. We're Boyle Heights because we're part of the city of Boyle Heights. But for geographical purposes, it's easily referred to as East Los Angeles. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But those that grew up there, it's a unique identifier. We're Boyle Heights. Matter of fact, the big hype of the East LA Classic, Rosa Garfield, literally the chants are Garfield will chant East LA, and Rosa will be chanting Boyle Heights, because that's the uniqueness of our boundaries, right? We have pride of you're East LA, we're Boyle Heights, but basically geographically it's East LA area.
And then how far are you from the coast?
We are probably about 20 miles from the beach, from Cabrillo Beach. And that would be considered directly south of us.
Okay. And then I wanted to call back to an earlier comment, how the loss of your brother in 94 impacted your life and changed you going forward.
Absolutely. Like I mentioned, this was a unexpected tragedy. And I say unexpected because my little brother was very much like me in the sense that he had friends of all walks of life, from scholars, athletes, homies, nerds. You call it, he had them all, right? The spectrum of friends. And he was a good student. He was taking trigonometry. This was in the 11th grade. He was playing football for the high school. So he had a lot of those traits of being that kid that grew up in the neighborhood, that knew how to navigate the neighborhood, and just had friends of all walks of life and was still able to take care of business. And it was unexpected because it was just a day dropping off their friends after they went out. they drop off their friends in the community called Wyvernwood, which is, they're not projects because they're not government owned, but basically it's a high density, low income housing in our area, literally half a mile from our house. And so they want to drop off friends in that area, Wyvernwood. The gang is considered 8th Street, right? Not too far from Wyvernwood, across one of those streets, it's Estrada Courts. That's the gang that's called Barrio Nuevo Estrada, V&E, right? We don't know to this day who shot my little brother, but it's speculated that people from V&E were shooting at the crowd because there's people from 8th Street in that crowd, right? So that's one speculation. And the reason I say that, because after my little brother's death, there was retaliation from people in that group who were most likely targeted that went and targeted people from V&E, and it went back and forth. And so multiple kids, young people got killed in maybe a 6-month, 9-month time frame, and it wasn't so much retaliation I don't think it was so much retaliation from my little brother. That might have been a part of it. I think part of it was that they knew they were targeted and their friend got killed, but it was a response to them being targeted, and it went back and forth. And it's tragic. It's so unfortunate, because it was even said that one of the kids that supposedly, the rumor, and I say rumor because I think it's just a rumor, but one of the rumors was that one of the kids that might have been the trigger guy was a kid that my dad would go to summer school with my brother, and my dad would give him rides.
Oh my
gosh. And that's a rumor, right? That it was one of those, and he lived in Estrada Courts, right? And at my brother's funeral, you had people, like I said, we actually had a procession. We marched from Fresno Park, Garcia Park, where I grew up at, to the local church, Resurrection Church, which is just under a half a mile walk, just more than a quarter mile. But later we had banners, the whole street, banners of young people from the high school, and of all walks of life. Talking about athletes, nerds, scholars, cholillos, tigers, parents, just like a reflection of the entire community that literally marched to the church, with banners honoring my little brother. And so at the funeral service, there was a full house. Most of the time you get, and this at the church, at funeral services, when you have them at a funeral house, whatever, they're small, so you kind of get a full house. But this at a church, the church was crowded, and we had media there, and a lot of youngsters, youngsters of, like I said, all walks of life. And this one alleged kid that might have been the rumored trigger guy was actually at the funeral. I mean,
is that right?
Just yeah. And then some of these kids who were there were also at the funeral, right? Who were there where brother was killed, who were what I'm calling the alleged targets. Again, because we don't know who actually did it. One would just speculate that they were the alleged target. So it's interesting that in that sense, because we did banners. I got a lot of my little brother's friends of all walks like to help us out. We did banners every night, after my brother's death until the funeral, doing banners in my parents' house. We had rolls of paper and paint, and man, literally the whole block was a beautiful procession full of banners and just rows and rows of kids and families that just marched, So my little brother's death wasn't just another death. Of course it was personal to me, but it hit home for the neighborhood because nobody expected it.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, I know that there was a foundation set up in Rogelio's name. Can you tell us a little bit about that and, what kind of work was done in the community as a result of that?
Yeah, absolutely, man. And thanks for asking for that because, like I mentioned, one of my goals was to figure out how do we address these issues, right? So when I was a student at Berkeley, I worked for a program called Break the Cycle. And the program worked with the elementary school kids to enhance their reading and their math skills, right? And so I was a supervisor there, if you will. So I managed a classroom and I got the curriculum. And I learned that in my elementary school, Sunrise Elementary School, 88% of the kids were below average in math and reading.
Ooh,
Let me repeat that. 88% are below average. Below average. Only 12 kids out of 100 were average or above. To me, that was one of the triggers in my neighborhood. If we're losing them early to the streets, if the kids do not have a strong academic foundation, if by 7th grade they don't want to go to school because they don't feel they know what's going on, by 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, we're losing them, it makes sense why we have youngsters joining neighborhoods, joining gangs. It makes sense why youngsters are getting high.
No future, yeah.
Why they're getting high, why they're making bad decisions. So I decided, I said, when I realized that statistic, I said, we're going to implement what we had at Berkeley, and we're going to call it Si Se Puede, right? For in Cesar Chavez memory, yes, you can, right? We call it Si Se Puede tutorial program, right? And so that was one of the programs that we developed. And what I purposely did is I brought smart kids from the high school, and I brought kids who are struggling to be tutors, right? And I learned that those kids that were struggling in school, that were tutors, were my best tutors because they knew how difficult it was to learn. So they were the best tutors to tutor the kids because they had the most patience and understanding. And many of us think only the smart kids could be tutors. I did not exclude any smart kids, but I purposely brought a mixture because I wanted all youngsters to have a chance to help out. So that was one program that we did that was phenomenal. Then we also did a program called La Belleza del Barrio, the beauty of our community, right? So remember I told you growing up, we have graffiti on the walls, it's by the freeways, so a lot of tagging and abandonment, tunnels. So we did this program called La Belleza del Barrio, where we literally had youngsters, taggers, artists, no art skills, convert our neighborhood walls with cultural art, right? So we painted our walls, we planted trees, right? And this was all Mehul and Dion, all heart and soul. This wasn't a job where one got paid or a grant. This was contacting your councilman, we need paint. This was contacting LA Conservation Corps, we need trees. This is contacting, coordinating with parks, talking to neighbors, making sure we have food. This was just, and to me, that was my therapy, right? That was my therapy of dealing with this tragedy of my little brother, but that was also my therapy of looking for answers of how do we address the violence of a young person who pulled that fucking trigger?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
And it's not a solve all, but I'll tell you right now, those kids that we touched in that era, man, from the kids that were distracted to the kids that were on point, man, I could tell you right now, those same individuals were college students that took it and became PhDs, that were college students and became lawyers, that were high school students that are now a doctor at Memorial, that were high school students and ran their own nonprofit organizations or have their own little business, right? So that work that we did truly was impactful down the road in these youngsters' lives.
Yeah,
so
what a legacy. What a legacy.
I was asking a question.
Man.
How often does someone come up, and say, hey, thanks, you saved me.
Right.
How often does it happen?
It was a trick because around that time frame, 94, 99, and then when I worked for the city of Inglewood in LA, I would do college trips with kids that worked in Inglewood, and we go to college and we come across one of these youngsters, and they're like, man, this guy was very influential while I went to college. Oh man, so when I was doing those college trips with kids from Inglewood or Watts and take them to these different colleges, there would be youngsters who are part of the foundation who are now in the institutions, and we would either run into them or they were the people that we would contact to coordinate college tours, right? And to this day, I still am in contact with a lot of these individuals because of the work that they did and are doing. Matter of fact, we just did a career day not too long ago out in Norwalk at one of the middle schools. And it was, coming across peers that I did work with back then, right? And we maintained contact here and there, but yeah, this was the work that we did. In 1998, I got the Presidential Award from President Clinton
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah. I went to the White House.
Wow.
I went to the White House. I went to the Oval Office.
We should have started with that.
Yeah.
That's pretty big.
But no, it's a part of the story, but it's not the full story. And let me tell you, I was a humble, broke ass individual who just were doing the good work, right? I'll give you an example. So the foundation, we grew it. We started doing tutoring program at Sunrise. Then we took it to like a couple of the elementary schools, First Tree Elementary School. And then right around 1998, there was a community center that was built on Evergreen and Cesar Chavez. They built like housing, low-income housing. Then they had a community center and they invited us to do a program there. And so we ran a computer lab and continued our academic programs there. And so it was just good work. But the reason I bring that up, so at that point, 98, now we're finally getting in contact with like the ARCO Foundation. And I would meet with the funder from ARCO Foundation at the pantry, right? And I knew she was going to pay for the meal. I just had to pay for my $1 parking, right? And I would scrape the floor of my car to find the change to pay for my $1 parking, right? I knew my meal was paid for. Whatever that cost, $10, $15 back then, whatever it was, I didn't worry about that. But I would scrape the car to find change to pay for that $1 validated parking at the pantry.
But at least you knew that at least you knew your meal at the pantry with those serving sizes would probably last you all day.
Right. It was worth
you
it.
Get that to-go bag too, right?
or even the days where I would, find some change to buy a burrito across the street at a taco truck, right? And so it might have costed $2-3, but what I'm trying to say is that those were very humble days, and I didn't care. Here I'm coming out of UC Berkeley, prestigious school, and I'm doing humble work in the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
I didn't care. It was all about the good work. It was all about keeping my brother's memory alive. It was all about impacting lives. It was beautiful, and unfortunately, I had to get a job eventually because I had a kid, I had to buy diapers and formula. So I ended up working for the city of Inglewood. Then I ended up working for the city of LA. And then I got blessed to do consulting as a gang expert.
Great
that's
segue.
Kind of been the journey. Absolutely.
I want to pause you there because that's a great segue, because that's exactly what I want to transition into now. And then how did you get into the world of being a gang expert in criminal cases based on what you just laid out for us until now? Yeah.
So I obviously recognize that my personal experience and journey and the work I did with the foundation were true landmarks that gave me the framework to understand this field, right? When I worked for the city of Inglewood for a couple of years, I worked with young people now in a city capacity. So it wasn't as intense, but still working with that population, got exposed to more gangs in the Inglewood and South Bay area. And then when I worked for the city of LA in Watts, we were in Watts, worked with a lot of gangs in the Watts, Compton, surrounding areas. But then we also developed a program, the juvenile camps. So I had a chance to work with incarcerated youth throughout LA County.
So for our listeners now in those areas, you're dealing with primarily Black gangs, I'm assuming.
A mixture. Black gangs, white gangs, Hispanic gangs from throughout LA County, right? And now I'm interviewing them because we want them to be a part of this program that we're implementing at the camp while they're incarcerated. So I'm learning about their stories. And now when they're in a program, we collaborate with LA Trade Tech and they're taking college classes. And now when they're getting released, we go with them to the probation meetings or we go to them to court, right? So all these things are happening. At this time, I don't know this gang expert thing exists.
Yeah.
Right. So now I fast forward, it's around 2006, and I get subpoenaed by this attorney to go to court to testify. I'm thinking, for what? It turns out one of the youngsters that we worked with, his cousin picked up a murder case. His cousin was from a gang in Watts, and the murder happened literally on the other side of that tunnel from where I grew up.
Oh my gosh.
Right? In the White Fence area. Right? And this is 2006 now. So I get subpoenaed to go to court. I remember I was tired that day. And then, the way it goes to court, all morning we're there, nothing happens. I remember saying, you know what, I'm tired. I'm ready to go back to my office but I was subpoenaed, so I stick it out, and then they call me to testify. I just got subpoenaed. I'm not a gang expert yet. I just get called and I just answer questions. That's all I did. They showed me a graffiti. I said, that's not gang graffiti. That's tagging because this is, and it was. I explained exactly what it was. And I explained the gang boundaries. And I just explained what I knew at the time, right? And I was in front of Judge Johnson. At the time, Judge Johnson was one of the judges in charge of the panel of gang experts.
Ah, okay.
And
that's the connection.
By accident, he recommended me to apply. So I didn't know this thing, gang expert, existed until I applied, became a part of the panel, and then I got deep into the work that I do.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.